Apologies also, but that's a very boring title, isn't it? That really looks like a title written by government. How about that? So, I want to start today by saying that the world really is changing, and it's changing in a number of different ways, and I think the world of environmental observation needs to change and to keep up with that pace of change. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see these changes impacting your world, our world, and then some of the challenges that I think those throw up. And I promise I didn't confer with Doug before this, but actually seeing his little graphic about some of the main topics of today, I completely agree that some of those things are where we need to be spending some time thinking strategically. So, the first aspect of change, the bit of change I guess this room is most aware of. The environment is changing, the scientific consensus gets stronger every year, and I could have picked any number of scary graphs with hockey stick shaped curves to them to emphasize that. I think one of the things that I want to draw out from this slide, however, is that our understanding of that change is based on a huge number of different ways of collecting that information. So these graphs are both from global assessment groups, from IPBES and from IPCC. And they show two very different sets of technology, if you like, for collecting ideas of change. Both of understanding how biodiversity is changing, and hidden within that graph is so much diverse data, and also looking at sea level rise and the new technologies that we've got for measuring that with greater and greater accuracy. So we know that that is happening. And at the same time, policies, and I've put politics here, that's a shorthand term really for society, I think is also changing. You know, in Defra, if you'll forgive me for being England-centric for a moment, we've got 3 bills going through the House of Commons at the same time. I don't think that's happened to Defra ever, and I don't think it's happened to its prior departments for many, many years. And these bills are not small pieces of legislation. They are very fundamental changes to the way that we look after our environment and the way that we interact with those who depend on it and work with it. And so they ought to interact, and they will change the way that our policy is done over the coming years. And then at the same time, last year we had an absolute peak in people being concerned about the environment. It moved right up above so many of the more normal things for people to be worried about. One thing I thought was interesting, much as Extinction Rebellion made my trip to work extremely difficult for a few weeks, I was interested to see, if you looked at the banners, notably made out of plastic, that Extinction Rebellion were putting up, they really covered a wide range of issues, from biodiversity through to food, through to climate, through to our oceans and plastic. So society is seeing this as a range of problems. It's not just one thing. And they're seeing that we need to be tackling this on a number of fronts. And the third thing that's changing is our technology. And I'm sure we're going to spend a lot of today discussing what's at the absolute cutting edge of monitoring, the sort of stuff that you might see on the right-hand side, thanks to my friends in the Environment Agency. But I think that also we should be thinking about the traditional as well. Because almost nothing, and here I'm willing to be challenged, almost nothing that we can spot from space cannot be enhanced or checked by what we see happening on the ground. And we need to work out how those two go together. So the second thing that I want to think about today is this issue of integration and collaboration, making the links. We have a situation of change, we have a situation of complexity. And therefore we have a job to do to make the links between subject areas so that we can have a joined up and effective response. I thought it was absolutely telling, the words in the ICBES global report, which said we can do something about global biodiversity loss, but only if we simultaneously treat the direct drivers of change and the indirect drivers of change, and we do that now. So, no room for manoeuvre. We cannot find a silver bullet. We need to work in a joined up way. And so for me, sitting in Defra, one of the things that's most obvious is we need join up between our policies. And so here I have a range of things that are in the environment. And if we think about the way that policies have been built over the last 30 or 40 years, they've really focused on individual aspects of that. And now the question is, are we at a stage where we have good controls over those individual aspects, but what we need to do is work out how they join together so that we actually drive the change that we need to see. And you will see a lot of language around that in sort of jargon terms, the sort of natural capital agenda, the ecosystem services agenda, if I'm allowed to be a bit old-fashioned, the nature-based solutions agenda, if I'm allowed to be really up-to-date, and COP26. All of these are thinking about those integrated approaches and thinking about how we can work with natural systems to deliver the outcomes that are so important for society and for nature. Another area that I feel passionately that we need to make the links at the moment is between countries. So we're moving into a time where policies in the 4 countries of the UK are ever more diverse and ever more devolved. And that's fantastic in a way, because actually our countries are very different geographically in terms of the environment and in terms of the stresses and strains that we put on that environment. And I think, from a very geeky perspective, that actually that gives us a great opportunity to think about controlled experiments between countries. You never get the chance to do controlled experiments on the environment because you can't keep one thing the same and move another. Well, actually, we've got a bit of an opportunity here. People are trying different things in different countries. How do we, as a community that spans all of those countries, make the absolute most of those differences in the way that we extract information from the effectiveness of those different policies? And the other thing that we need to think about very much at the moment is this idea of looking outwards to new partners around the world. That's happening in other parts of government, and I think we need to think about it here as well. What are the opportunities for working across the world? Of course, with COP26 coming up, we've got lots of opportunities to shout about how brilliant we are and how we can help people around the world. Lots of new opportunities springing up for new partnership working, new co-investment. So I think that's a really exciting area. It'll be interesting to get views today of how effective we think as a community we are at making these links strategically. And the third area where we need link up, and I probably don't even need to say this, is between disciplines. I think you all in this room would know the value of linking up the power of data science, natural science, economics, social science, etc. And note, I put firmly in here as a discipline, policy and delivery, because actually if we're not linked up with those, then we can create some wonderful gizmos, but they won't be used. So, a few challenges for us to think about perhaps through the day. How can environmental monitoring adapt to the changing policy and delivery landscape? Just a few things to think about why I think that's a challenge for us. The first is the speed of change. You know, things are happening very fast. They're not necessarily always terribly predictable. And yet, what we do in this room is very long-term often and relies on being able to look forwards and backwards over long periods of time. Can that be flexible when the landscape is changing? How do we spot the new opportunities? in that changing landscape, and how do we spot them soon enough to be able to go to that policy or delivery area and say, actually there's something we can do, and we've spotted it early enough that we can build it in before you have created your new system and not realised the opportunities there. And so this big question, which we can maybe discuss over lunchtime, evidence-based or evidence-backed policy doesn't go away, but this is the push-pull. How do we ensure that we have got the technologies, the data, the information, the insight in place to drive policy innovation? And how do we also ensure that we have that information in place to see how policies are doing and to help policy formation? So it's a real push-pull. So where are the new things that we're going to need to understand change? I'm seeing this all the time, and again, this is a picture I've stolen, so please don't take too many photos of it, but you know, the area of soils is just here to exemplify, is this a known unknown? Do we need to know more about the biodiversity that we cannot see when we're thinking about structure and function relationships? So, are there new scales at which we need to be able to operate? If we're having policies which are more locally driven, do they need a different spatial scale from the scales that we perhaps more traditionally used to working at? And this issue of evidence at the joints. Where is the evidence that we need to make sure that air quality policy and climate change policy go together? Where is it that we need the evidence to show that farming policy and water policy go together? Because that might not be something that is driven by one or the other. And how do we make sure that that is well funded? And what better targeted insights can we provide to these policymakers? So the next couple of slides show a lot of stuff which is based around Earth observation, with thanks to my team who run that, and from different parts of the Defra group. So can we use new knowledge to help us to do things and to help policy people to get insights which they haven't been able to have? So for example, you know, without going out and asking every farmer what status of their crop, we wouldn't have known it in the past. If we do know it, what opportunities does that open up? If we have a map of our habitats, which is not just around the protected areas, but indeed around the habitats across the whole of the country, what opportunities does that open up? And thinking to Doug's example about delivery as well, this isn't just about policy making, this is about what we're doing on the ground. And how can these new ways of seeing our environment help us with those delivery aspects, be it planting trees, responding to floods, thinking about illegal fishing. And I think also, finally, I want to put a bit of a plea out to say, don't forget the boring bit. It's very easy for me to stand up in front of my policy people and wave a lovely map that's been generated, real-time flooding event, and say, look, isn't this fantastic? But it's much, much harder for me to make the case to say, you do know that you're going to have to invest in the data architecture, don't you? And actually that's quite a big cost. And actually it doesn't take 2 minutes. And the other thing we need to invest in is the people. And that's people like you, the experts, sure, but it's also the people who aren't actually that expert, who we're suddenly going to expect not to be looking at a few statistics, but to be looking at real-time geospatial data information. Can they do that? Do they understand what they're looking at? Do they understand how to manipulate it? So I think there's a real question about upskilling both the skilled people and the less skilled people to make this really work into policy and delivery. So, how can we today help everyone to rise to the challenge? I want to thank you right at the beginning of the day, as experts and as colleagues, for providing me with a lot of exciting stuff which I can go to the policymakers and to delivery people and show them and excite them. So I need to know that if I'm raising the expectation, that we as a community are going to be able to answer that expectation. So I'm really looking forward to the discussions today, and I'm happy to take any immediate questions. Thank you.